Just a few days ago, I had an email from a hotel in San Francisco headed Summer of Love, Summer of Savings. And this, for me, brought back my own personal memory of the Summer of Love in 1967. I wasn't in the place, I was there in the time, but at a great distance. I was in deepest Dorset. And there was an effect on popular culture. It was in pop music, people wearing, well, this kind of thing, caftans, my own memory of the day. They were wearing bells, more people were padding around barefoot, but for quite a short period of time. It was a passing fashion. But I think there was some more long-term results, impacts and influences from the Summer of Love. And I think about it more as a long Summer of Love, not just the Summer of 67, but over a period of about 5 years, where you see particularly the impact of Indian culture being popularised in Europe and in America, and particularly in Britain. And you can see this, I think, in three ways. You can see, for example, this is connected, bound up with the start of the so-called Hare Krishna, or the ISKCON movement in Britain. You can also see it in the way in which Indian culture simply came slightly more to the fore. And also, finally, I think there's a slight contribution to world music, the creation of what we now call world music. And this, in some ways, is tied up, I suppose, with the arrival of ISKCON in Britain, and also with the way in which ISKCON became momentarily associated with the Beatles, who were then at the very height of their popularity. So, I mean, if you track things down around that time, looking before 1967, George Harrison of the Beatles had already started to learn the sitar under Ravi Shankar, the great Indian musician. And if you go back to some of their lyrics, even then you start to find hints of what is known as Krishna consciousness, Krishna worship. Go back and look at I'm the Walrus, for example, in 1967, and you'll find an allusion there to Krishna. What was all we need is love? What was that about? Was that about Krishna consciousness? So if you think of this as a rather kind of very specific example of a cultural crossover, behind this you've also got a growing collaboration between musicians like Ravi Shankar, who previously collaborated with Yehudi Menuhin, but then with George Harrison, particularly of the Beatles. George Harrison produced the first British chant produced by the Hare Krishna movement, which also got into the top 10 in 1969, which helped to prepare for the arrival of ISKCON in Britain. I went to one of the first meetings of the Swami, A.C. Bhaktivedanta, of the ISKCON movement, late in 1969. And I mean, the poster's interesting. Think of the impact of a figure dressed like this in traditional robes in Britain in 1969. It was a very different time then. And I think from this time onwards, you can see a kind of increasingly rich cultural exchange, which you see in 1971 with the collaboration between George Harrison and Ravi Shankar in the concert for Bangladesh, to aid Bangladesh at that time. A change in the way in which pop music was being used, and also a way in which popular culture was becoming increasingly more associated with this notion of cultural exchange. And so, yeah, we've gone beyond the Summer of Love. But the Summer of Love took place in San Francisco, and some of the first devotees who were sent across to Britain from the United States to bring ISKCON, Krishna consciousness, to Britain, were from the San Francisco center of the ISKCON movement. And that was actually created right at the peak of the Summer of Love in 1967. So all kinds of interesting currents there. I'm glad I kept my kaftan, although I don't wear it today.